just a second, we will be in Matthew 8. Not sure if anyone will be joining on here, but it's all set up. Give me a second to turn my Bible. Okay. Just a reminder, not this upcoming Sunday night, but the Sunday night after, starting in September, we're going to be meeting at the building at 6 p.m. for kind of like a group Bible class. So we'll have to get back in the habit of getting together again. It's been a very long time, but looking forward to that very much. Tonight, like I said, Matthew 8. And before we get started, why don't we go to God in prayer? Bow with me, please. Father in heaven, you are a good God, an amazing God. You are a God who is the King over the heavens and the earth. We thank you for delivering to us the gospel that Matthew has faithfully recorded. We pray that we can learn from the authority of Jesus tonight that he ought to be the one we respect and love and obey. We treat him as the true king that he is. We ask that you'll help us to submit our will to his. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. What I mentioned in my prayer is what we talked about, kind of the main point of the rest of the book, the fact that Jesus is in all authority. Jesus is Lord, Jesus is King, however you want to think about it. And so a lot of the stories that come next, particularly the next 3 chapters, are all about that concept. Let's start with this story in the beginning of chapter 8, verses 1 through 4, about the leper. I'm going to go ahead and read these verses, starting in verse 1. When Jesus came down from the mountain, large crowds followed him, and a leper came to him and bowed down before him and said, "Lord, if you are willing, you can make me clean." Jesus stretched out his hand and touched him, saying, "I am willing, be cleansed." And immediately his leprosy was cleansed. And Jesus said to him, "See that you tell no one. Go show yourself to the priest. Present the offering Moses commanded as a testimony to them." So just stopping there. What do you know about the biblical condition known as leprosy? I'm sorry, what? Okay. Very good. So this man has genuine faith. That's what is what led to him getting healed. Good. Nicole? Good. Yeah, so, and technically there are more than one disease that they would have referred to in a grouping of leprosy. The most common one that we think of is one that's known as Hansen's disease, which, like Nicole said, it kills the nerves, it kills the skin, even deadens flesh to the point where you can lose limbs. Weird, interesting factoid. Did you realize that armadillos are the only other creature that have leprosy? Maybe if you were from down south, you did. We were warned, don't go play with an armadillo because, you might touch it and get sick. We can treat leprosy now because it is bacterial. It's not viral, but certainly they did not have proper methods. Another thing of what Nicole said, it is highly contagious. You can recall lots of stories in the Bible where, someone has leprosy, they have to actually stay outside the camp, outside the city, and they cannot be close. So, genuine faith, that's how Adolfo described it. How else would you describe this man's faith? What does he do to show his faith? Okay. So, yeah, he actually asks God. He knows he can. Are you willing to heal me? So, in his mind, it is never a matter of can you heal me, right? I think that's interesting. He knows it may not be his will, but he can do it. Good. Go ahead, Nicole. Yeah. No, absolutely. Yeah, and if you recall some of the Old Testament regulations, you would have to announce ahead of time if somebody was coming near on the road and you had leprosy. You'd have to shout out, unclean, unclean, and that sort of a thing. So it was a bold move for him to even approach Jesus, to bow down, and it would have been unthinkable to reach out towards Jesus, which, from what I understand, he doesn't do, but Jesus does the unthinkable and reaches out and touches this man. Now, I want you to think for a minute, if you had leprosy, and you were excluded from your community, you lived outside the camp or the town or whatever, what had you probably not experienced in a while? Okay, and a big part of that is physical touch. He hadn't hugged his family, hadn't hugged his friends. I don't know his whole story, but I know as a leper in Israel, he would not have been allowed to. So, to me, this speaks to Jesus' compassion, the fact that he would reach out and touch somebody. Miracles are important, yes, because they show Jesus' power, but the way he does some of his miracles shows more about his character even than his power. So I like the ones when someone's blind and he reaches out and touches them. Someone who, that's how they would know someone was there, you know. This one, when someone had not experienced touch for however long he's had this disease, Jesus reaches out and does something that, by the way, if you touched a leper, what would that make true of you in the Old Testament law? Yeah, he would have been unclean. Normally, the uncleanliness would pass on from the leper to you. Not so with the great healer, right? Which is a cool concept. And what do we find out about how this miracle takes place? Good. Yeah, I've been talking to my kids about this because we're reading through some Bible stories that are about the life of Jesus right now at home. And I stress to them, well, how is this different than going to the doctor? Because doctors can heal, but generally it takes a treatment plan over time, therapy, something like that. This was immediate. And to go from your skin being visibly, distressed in some way to being healed instantly. To go from nerve damage, which under normal circumstances would have been permanent, to being, I'm fixed. This would have been dramatic. This is one of those things that would have been nice to have a visual. What Rick Lanning always says, I wish I could go back and watch the Blu-ray in heaven to see what it would look like. It would be neat to be able to see this, but it was immediate, and it was from human touch. Now, what does Jesus say afterwards? There's a couple of interesting things after this miracle. Go ahead. Yeah. Okay, good. Let's start with the first one. You think that'd be easy to follow that advice? Why would Jesus even bother saying that when he knows people are probably going to be so happy they go share it? What is the point of Jesus and I guess it's kind of general, more than even just this case. What's the point of him saying that? Yeah. This is going to be, he's going to be popular anyway. He knows it. Some of these things, he wants to just help somebody in need. He's not here for the whole world to see it. He's like, I see one guy right here, I'm going to help him. So I think he's kind of trying to control that as best he can. Go ahead. Good. Yeah. Go ahead, Don. Good. Yeah, otherwise he would have set up a hospital, that would have been the greatest hospital on earth. Everyone come get healed. He had something he was trying to teach about himself and some message he was trying to get across. Now, interesting thing, by the way, who wrote this? Who wrote this book? And as far as we know, is Matthew a dedicated follower yet? It doesn't seem like it. So this is one of those events that I don't know if Matthew saw it or not. I know he didn't follow full time until just a little bit later in the text. But it's interesting, a lot of these miracles end up being seen by the closest of witnesses and then preserved by some of these things. I really like reading Matthew, his account, and John's, just knowing that they were there for a lot of this stuff. But he may or may not have been here for this particular miracle. But basically, it backs up whenever this happened. We understand Matthew doesn't necessarily have to put everything in exact order, but whenever it happened, it proves the main point of the end of chapter 7, doesn't it? Jesus has complete authority over disease. Now, the second part of what Dave said. So he says, don't tell anybody, but he also says, what? Go show yourself to the priests to make an offering. Why? Okay, and that could be part of it. Good. 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 Yeah, Robin? Yeah. And the cool part about it, this was key to rejoining society. That's what it is. Jesus isn't here just to make you feel better, and he isn't here just to fix the problem, but he wants him to become a part of civilization again. And he's also not here to just break the law. They actually had regulations for this. Now, this would apply for really any skin disorder, from something as routine and run-of-the-mill as eczema, all the way on up to leprosy. But you had to go to the priest as that final authority of whether or not they are truly healed and able to rejoin society. Now, it does make a lot of sense, even just from a social standpoint. If someone's got a really bad disease, you don't want them living in the middle of your camp, right? But I really think there's even something more going on here. Just the fact that, like I said, he gets to rejoin humanity. He gets a new lease on life. It's like life has started over again. And a preacher pointed this out to me before. How often do you think someone could go to a priest after having leprosy and say, look at me, I'm completely healed? I would venture a guess that it had not been that many times in their history. Even in the Old Testament, we find like Naaman and maybe one or two other cases. This is not something that happens every day. So the priests need to believe it before they can give him freedom to go back. Go ahead, Vicki. Yeah, she had to leave. She couldn't be around people anymore, right? So as long as she was infectious, she couldn't be there. Doesn't matter who you are. This disease doesn't really care who you are, does it? That's the thing that's funny about it. Disease doesn't just strike bad people or people who deserve it in our mind, right? So, here, he's stronger than that. Jesus takes it out of the way, and it's recorded for us, but it meant so much to him, I'm sure. Understanding, wow, he's the one who can do this. The next miracle kind of steps it up a notch. I mean, leprosy is a big deal, and he could touch someone who's leprous that no one else could touch, and yet Jesus remains clean, and the man was healed. So what is remarkable about this miracle that happens in verses 5 through 13? The centurion's servant. Okay, So yeah, before this even happens, he doesn't just bow down in front of him and say, touch me or something, or touch my servant. He says, I'm not even worthy for you to step foot in my house. But his faith is such that not only can you cure a terrible disease, you can do it from a distance. What does Jesus think about that kind of faith? Good. Good. Yeah, and this is fairly early in his ministry, and yet this centurion already understands the concept of authority, which is big. Jesus is going to spend the next 3 years trying to get other people to get it, even his own disciples, and they don't. Nicole? Yeah, good. Look in verse 10. What emotion or what reaction does Jesus have there? Good. But mine has a word in there. When Jesus heard this, he what? He marveled, right? What does it mean to marvel at something? Yeah. As far as I know, there are only 2 times the Bible ever says Jesus marvels at something. This is when he marvels at the faith of somebody he never would have expected to have faith. The other time, you might know where it is, it's where he marvels at the disbelief of the people who should have known best. Do you know who that is? There's Bible trivia here. I believe it's in Nazareth, at his own hometown. He marvels at their disbelief in his hometown that he looked for. If I'm wrong on that, there may be others, but I know those 2 at least. So, but it's amazing that Jesus, creator of the universe, is almost taken aback. Wow, you have a really big faith. This is an amazing thing for you to say this and to behave in this way. I mean, I'd like to be surprising to Jesus in this way, not like Nazareth. I don't want to be like Nazareth where, well, I've had every reason to believe and I don't. That takes Jesus aback. He's like, really? You don't believe? But here, he's a centurion. He's a Gentile. He's probably not generally the most, devout man as far as Old Testament regulations go, just simply being a centurion. Wow, what an amazing thing about his faith, right? So, now this idea of authority, he says, when I say go, they go. When I order my men to do it, they do it. In America, we kind of buck authority a lot. We like to be our own boss. It's good to be king, right? When, don't tell me what to do. That's sort of those American values, right? It doesn't matter what the government says. We just don't like it. We'll do it, but we'll kick our toes in the sand about it. In the military, you don't exactly get that option. There are stiff penalties. We've got a few people here that know what that's like. In the military, you don't buck authority. There is a very clear chain of command, and they say jump, you say how far, how high, whatever. You just do it. And, that's just how you're trained. This man understands that's how it should be with the Lord, right? Just tell me what to do, God, and I'll do it. Just tell me where to go, and I'll go there. Like, this is recognizing that Jesus is in authority. Now, I don't know if he knew he was the Son of God and grasped that, but he knew enough about the power of God and the teaching of Jesus here that he said, you can do it. You don't have to be close. You don't have to touch him. You don't have to even walk in my house. You can just say the word and it will happen. And, I think that could put our faith to the test sometimes when we're doubtful maybe about what Jesus can do or is willing to do. Just that idea that he's in charge. By the way, I talked about this at the very end of class last time. What is Jesus currently in authority over? Matthew 28. You're welcome to spoil it if you want. What does Jesus say about authority in Matthew 28? What authority does he have? All authority on heaven and on earth has been given to me. This centurion got it. We need to get it too. All authority has been given to him. So, by the way, Jesus did it, right? And how soon was this man healed? Right there, right? This is not, hey, take this medicine and call me in the morning. This is right there, from a distance. And he was kind of excited to hear. He found out what hour it happened. Now, it's interesting, he says, I want to read these verses of what Jesus said. Truly, I say to you, you have not found such great faith with anyone in Israel. I say to you that many will come from east and west, recline at the table with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, the kingdom of heaven. But the sons of the kingdom will be cast into the outer darkness. In that place there'll be weeping and gnashing of teeth. Jesus said to the centurion, go, it shall be done for you as you have believed. So, he points out there's going to be some people that make it into the kingdom, and it's going to be surprising. And there's some people who are, in their Jewish faith there, kind of born into it. But they're not going to make it into the kingdom. This kind of matches up with the Sermon on the Mount, right? All the stuff we read. There's actually more required than just be born of a certain faith. And I think there are going to be surprises on the day of judgment. Some people who may not feel that worthy end up in heaven because they're pleasing to God. And we're going to have some people that probably think, I deserve to be there. And they cry out, Lord, Lord, didn't I do all this stuff? And God will say, outer darkness. But yeah, just a powerful miracle here, teaching about his authority. We get the next one. This is one that I think is in like all three of they call them synoptic gospels, Matthew, Mark, and Luke. But who's the next person that Jesus heals? This would be starting in verse 14. Go ahead. Peter's mother-in-law. So we don't find out a whole lot about the families of the apostles, but we do know Peter is married. Later on, he becomes an elder in the Lord's church, so yet again, further evidence that his wife was a believer and that he was a parent. You have to have children to be an elder in the church, of course. But it is kind of amazing. You realize he packed up and moved. He followed Jesus right away. He even left wife and mother-in-law at home to follow Jesus whenever he does that. But what do we learn about her healing? How does that happen? Good. Yeah, so, maybe we go in, we feel someone's forehead to feel if they've got a fever. Well, when he touched her, he took a fever away. She was healed. How complete was her healing? Yeah. I don't know about you, but after I've had a fever for a couple of days, I don't really want to do anything. I might be healed, but I have like zero energy. And so projects remain undone. Or I'm just getting by, survival mode until I feel better. It takes a lot out of you to have a fever. And so the fact that he could just heal her so completely, so immediately, she gets up and can serve dinner. She plays a good host. It's an amazing miracle. Jesus is going to use Capernaum, and particularly the house of Peter, for kind of a home base at the beginning of his ministry. And I imagine that Peter's mother-in-law plays a role in hosting and supporting that. But it's just an amazing thing, and I'm sure a lesson to Peter as well. Of course, the whole town hears about it and ends up showing up at his door. But this is one of those, I really wonder, this is probably a lot for Peter too. Peter can see this in his own family. He knows she was sick, and then he sees the great speed at which she recovers. But here we find one of those notes that Matthew frequently brings. Remember, Matthew is writing to people who know their Old Testaments, who are looking for a Messiah. Generally, that would have been the Jewish people, but it could have been Gentiles as well, but people who knew the Old Testament looking for Jesus. How does Jesus fulfill Isaiah's prophecy? That's the second question on page 19. And do you have a reference? Where is that prophecy found? So, yeah, we have this Isaiah 53. And normally when we think of the passage in Isaiah 53, what are we thinking about? We talk about it at a certain time in our worship a lot of times, right? We're thinking about the cross. We're thinking about the crucifixion. But this is also a big proof that he is the Messiah, that he is the one talked about. Matthew recognizes that and wants us to recognize the same, that the Messiah that Isaiah wrote about was Jesus. What's his popularity like now? It starts out, he's like, don't tell anybody. Jesus knew what was coming. What's it like at this point? Okay. Yeah, he couldn't really get away, could he? He's going to try sometimes to get away, but it just doesn't work out very well. So he sees this crowd around him. He gives orders to depart to the other side of the sea. So Jesus is over there. This is question 1 and 2 under the subheading of verses 18 through 22. But he meets a scribe, and the scribe says, "Teacher, I will follow you wherever you go." Isn't that what you want to hear, right, if you're Jesus? What does Jesus warn him? Yeah. Are you ready for that? Becoming a follower of Christ doesn't mean that everything suddenly goes peachy in your life and you're just going to have blessings untold poured out on you, a big house, nice car, whatever, good job. That's not how it works. Now, you may receive plenty of blessings, but you also might just have food and clothing, right? Go back to the Sermon on the Mount, right? With those things will be content. You might just have your daily bread. Are you ready to follow him wherever he'll go? Why would Jesus say that to someone who seems so dedicated to follow him? Good. Yeah. Good. Yeah, and this is, like you said, Jesus knows his heart. He knows what he needs to hear. Now, I'd like to think the scribe turned around and followed him, maybe. But this is something that we all need to realize, is that there's a cost to following Jesus. And it may be personal, financial, family-related. I've always said, I'm not going to try to talk you out of becoming a Christian. If someone asks me, could you please baptize me? But I'm going to tell you some things about the cost. I recall at least 3 different times that I've been here that when someone wanted to be baptized, I usually want to talk to them in person if I can, beforehand. Sometimes I'll bring them to another room if I haven't been the one point of contact. Maybe they've been talking to someone else at church. And I do like to talk to them. I was like, so, life isn't going to necessarily be easy. This is just the start. Things may get difficult. There's some work involved. Are you ready for it? But if I could talk you out of becoming a Christian, you're not ready. But I have to be fair to let people know you do this long enough and you'll suffer, right? In some way, there will be difficulty. You'll be required to make a sacrifice or change. And I'm not saying you're going to be fed to lions or burned at the stake. But to be a Christian, I don't think most Christians of their day were fed to lions or burned at the stake. There are the social pressures that go along with being a Christian. And in this case, it could be employment. What was this man's employment, by the way? When he says, I'll follow you wherever you go. What's going to happen later on to scribes that profess loyalty to Jesus? You might remember it from the story of the man who was born blind in the book of John, and he gets healed. What are his parents afraid of? Yeah. So if you're kicked out of the synagogue as a normal worshiper, it just means you can't go to Sabbath worship, right? You can't be part of your society. If you're a scribe and you're kicked out of the synagogue, what does that mean? No more money. By the way, it can be scary sometimes as a Bible teacher to speak up in certain situations, knowing that if I say the wrong thing, I'm out of here. I don't feel that way here, but still there are moments when I'm like, somebody's not going to like to hear this thing. So I think that's probably what's going on here with the scribe too. Like, if you take a stand for me, you're not going to be the most popular scribe in town, and you're probably going to have to leave your synagogue. From what I understand, there's another synagogue leader who doesn't care later on, who's going to be from a similar area, perhaps. You remember Jairus, or Jairus, however you say that name. Certainly, you could be a ruler in the synagogue and still trust Jesus, let come what may. But it was going to be uncommon because you put everything in jeopardy to accept Jesus. That's why Nicodemus comes at night, right? He knows what goes on. And there's this moment in the book of John where they're all talking, debating about Jesus. He tries to defend him a little bit, backhandedly. You don't believe him too, do you? Because nobody who's a scribe or Pharisee believes Jesus. There's this social pressure, and it could lead to loss of livelihood. So I'm not saying you're going to lose your job for taking a stand for your faith, but you could. And people have. So count your cost. The next one is maybe a little harder to understand. I think that one we get. But why does he have such a harsh answer for the guy who says, Lord, permit me first to go bury my father? Why is he so harsh with it? Okay. And there were traditions they had. They bury him once, they get the bones gathered up and have another ceremony, things like that. That's one possibility. And I think that's part of what makes sense here. It's hard. I mean, family is important. Family is so important. And honoring your father and mother is essential. To me, what makes the most sense is he's not dead yet. And like you said, you would not be out there following a crowd if your dad's back home and his body needs buried that week or something. That wouldn't be the occasion. So at this point, Jesus is asking him to make a choice. He's like, I'm here right now. Right? Let the dead bury their own dead. What might that mean? And I guess this is maybe my interpretation, my speculation. Does it seem like his dad is very enthused about the gospel, perhaps? Let the dead bury their own dead. I get the picture. His dad is not someone who's on board with Jesus. He's dead, perhaps, in his trespasses. Certainly a dead person is not going to bury a literal dead person. I think he's talking about his faith here. He's saying, I'm here now. Follow me. It'll be time to take care of a burial if it happens. I'm here now. That's my take on it, I guess. Anybody else have any other thoughts or observations? Vicky and then Randy. Okay, good. We'll always find a reason, won't we? If we don't want to do something, we will always find a reason. Go ahead, Randy. you don't have to volunteer or raise your hand, but does anybody here think that maybe in your own faith walk that you waited too long to do something you should have done before? I have. I'll raise my hand. There have been moments that I know I should have done something, but I put it off for whatever reason. And it took me longer than it should have to make the commitment to do what's right. So, Jesus is saying, I'm here now. Serve me now. If you're waiting to serve God until this happens or that happens, you'll never really get around to it, maybe. There's a possibility. Now's the time. I think the urgency of obeying is part of respecting his authority. When I tell my kids, turn off the TV, get up here, it's time for breakfast, or take out the trash in your room, feed your fish, whatever their little chores are at the house, bring your dishes to the sink. I don't mean after you've done 10 things. In my house, I think I'm pretty patient, probably more patient than even my parents were, but when I ask them to do it, I want them to do it. Not to do 10 things until they forget about it and I've got to clean up after. When we understand authority, you don't tell your sergeant, I want to sleep in, I'm not going to get up at 0500. You don't say that. So, if you recognize the authority of Jesus, we always say, obeying means right away, all the way with a happy heart. That we say those over and over again. And whenever they mess up, we try to get them to figure out and say out loud, because they already know, like, what didn't you do out of those 3 things? Right away, all the way with a happy heart. Certainly bringing one dish way later than I told them to bring all their dishes, that's not acceptable. Partial obedience or late obedience. So it starts at a young age, but honestly, us grown-ups are pretty bad at this too sometimes. And Jesus recognized that. These 2 men needed to hear it. Like I said, I'd love to believe that they followed at some point. It says when he got into the boat, his disciples followed him. So I don't know whatever became of these 2 guys. But Jesus told them what they needed to hear at that moment. The next story is an interesting one. Each gospel has different takes on exactly what happens. But what do we learn from Matthew's account about this storm on the sea? Yeah. Good. Good. Now, I'm going to come to their defense a little bit. What were the occupation of at least 4 of the guys probably on this boat? Fishermen. Where did they spend a lot of their time? Did they know a bad storm when they saw one? The waves are actually coming over the boat. However, let's go to Dave's point. What had they seen? It's not mentioned in Matthew, but they'd seen the water turn to wine, like something comes from nothing. They'd seen someone immediately healed with leprosy when they were touched. They'd seen unclean spirits cast out, a fever rebuked, and then it's gone. So, yes, it was scary. Yes, it was dangerous. But Jesus says, you don't really have a lot of faith right now. Go ahead, Nicole. sometimes actually witnessing that sort of power and strength. They said, even the winds and the waves obey him. Like, who is this? Like, we thought we knew who he was, but who is this? Yeah. Go ahead. Yeah. Okay. And I will say, do you know how I know they could have had enough faith by this point? Who had enough faith by this point? We've already read about him this chapter. The centurion, right? The centurion did not have all of this to go on. He had, from what I understand, not seen many of the wonders. They had not yet happened. And yet the centurion said, from a distance you can heal. And Jesus marveled. He says, I've not found your faith in all of Israel, meaning I've not even found that faith in my apostles, right? And my followers, Peter, Andrew, James, and John, I have not found this kind of faith. So I know it was possible with much less than they had. However, I feel like if I was them, I would have been in their same shoes. And keep in mind, it is very likely that a couple of them are teenagers at this point. So, I mean, take that with a grain of salt. They probably were late teens, early 20s. They're learning these lessons, and they're getting to see powerfully demonstrated who Jesus is. And I like the words, even the winds and the waves, or even the waves, or winds and the sea obey him. Okay, so if leprosy obeys Jesus, if demons obey Jesus, if a fever obeys Jesus, all these things are done with his words, right? What should I do with his words? If you hear my words and do them, you are like someone who builds his house upon the rock, right? Hear his words and obey. The wind could do it. Why can't you? And this is sort of the point of all this. That's why we had these two guys that didn't quite, at that moment, they weren't quite as committed. They needed to hear something from Jesus. Are you sure you're ready to commit? Let the dead bury their own dead. Or don't you know you won't even have a place to lay your head? I don't. So notice the words. I think there's a reason why Matthew selects these stories. Of all the miracles he could choose, he's trying to prove a point. Listen to the words of Jesus and obey. So, and I keep getting ahead of myself. The demon thing hadn't quite happened yet. It's next, which I think is even a step up above the wind and the sea. Understanding satanic forces. I've seen horror movies and stuff like that. I'm sure don't even cover the half of it. I don't like that kind of stuff. Knowing that Satan had his messengers out in the world accomplishing terrible things. It did happen in the Old Testament infrequently, but right around when Jesus walked the earth, it seems to have been like Satan was throwing everything he could at the world. I think Satan kind of knew his time was up, from what we understand. And this is where we find out there was two guys. There's one of them in particular with the name of Legion, who seems to be the scarier of the two and has an interaction we read in Mark as well as in Luke. But with these two guys, how out of control were they? Yeah. They just ended up avoiding this area. They couldn't go through there anymore. What are some of the crazy things these guys did? Supernatural evil strength to be able to rip chains apart. I can't even fathom that, cutting themselves. They didn't wear clothes. They were wild. What did they recognize, though, about Jesus when he walks up? Notice that the demons know who he is. A lot of the people around don't. We'll talk about that story more next time. I don't want to go too long. I don't want to miss that story, though. We'll go back to that story on Wednesday.
Good evening. It's time for us to get started. Gonna start our service this evening with Step by Step. Oh God, you are my God, and I will ever praise you. Oh God, you are my God, and I will ever praise you. I will seek you in the morning. step by step you'll lead me, and I will follow you all of my days. Oh God, you are my God, and I will ever praise you. Oh God, you are my God, and I will ever praise you. I will seek you in the morning, and I will learn to walk in your ways. And step by step you'll lead me, and I will follow you all of my days. And I will follow you all of my days. And I will follow you all of my days. And step by step you'll lead me, and I will follow you all of my days.
Good evening, brothers and sisters. Good to be with you tonight. For our exhortation, I thought I'd share something that Brother John Wilson sends me. It's a daily encouragement. It's called Mornings with Jesus. I really appreciate that John signed me up for this, and I just thought I'd share something. The writer recently was just reflecting on the blessings of summer days, and how nice they are, even when they're hot and muggy. But the writer encouraged readers to seek out pathways to rest and to abide in the unforced rhythms of God's grace. I can't help but smile. I read that because when I first read it, it might sound like just a lot of poetic gobbledygook, and I was inclined to dismiss it as such at first, but it just sounded so peaceful and sweet, seeking out pathways to rest and abiding in the unforced rhythms of God's grace. Those words kind of just stuck in my mind, and the more I got to thinking about them, I realized, well, those ideas are really rooted in biblical concepts. This first, the idea of seeking out pathways to rest. We all need rest, right? And God recognizes that, and He has provided rest to His people throughout all the generations. The Sabbath provisions are, an example of that. But you think about how God provided rest from labor. He provided rest from hardship, from oppression, from enemies, and ultimately, the biggest form of rest is rest with God Himself. The idea of being at peace with God and winning rest from this battle that we are all engaged in with Satan and with our own sin. Being at rest with God. Not being like Jacob, who struggled with God. We tend to have a nature that wants to fight with God, where we need rest with Him. And I think one might say that the search for this kind of rest is the primary objective of our existence, being at rest with God. I'm reminded of Hebrews 4 verse 9, where it says, there remains a Sabbath rest for the people of God. And that's what we're all after. We get moments of spiritual rest, peace, like perhaps what we're doing tonight, where we can assemble and we can enjoy fellowship with God and with one another. It is a snippet of the kind of rest that awaits. So while we enjoy that kind of rest, and I'm talking spiritual rest with God, at times in this life, we look forward to a much more satisfying and lasting rest that is promised for the believers of God. Secondly, this idea of abiding in the rhythms of God's grace. That sounds fancy, but really in biblical language, it comes down to knowing God through His Word and through His Son Jesus, and then choosing to conform our lives to His image. Learning to surrender our own will and our own offbeat syncopations, if you would, putting away the idea of marching to our own drumbeat, and instead learning the peace and harmony of aligning our lives with the rhythms of God. And In one ways, I think that rhythm of God is gently playing behind all the noise of life. And the problem is, though, that life gets busy, and we fill our minds with so much noise. I'm reminded of the car that we occasionally pull up next to at the intersection, and it's just bouncing, with so much the radio that's playing, and it's got all these giant amplifiers and speakers, and we're sitting there, and we can feel it within our bones, and we maybe laugh and maybe ridicule that, But then we fill up our lives with the same kind of noise. That's me. That's me in my own mind with my own noise blaring and blocking out that still small voice that is God speaking. And we cannot hear, I think, the heartbeat that is behind creation and all existence that he's put there if we'll just listen to it. And we come to know that through his word and conforming to his rhythms and giving up our own herky-jerky syncopations. Really, it all boils down to our connection to God. And so that we're close enough to feel those rhythms, and we're close enough to see the pathways to rest. That's really what's at the heart of pathways to rest and rhythms of God. We must know him. And I'm reminded of John 17:3. And this is eternal life, that thou mightst know him, the only true God, and Jesus Christ, whom he has sent. Do we know God? Are we nurturing that connection to him, that relationship? If we don't, we're not going to find pathways to rest. We're not going to abide in the unforced rhythms of God's grace. If you don't know him, we'd like to introduce you to him and start that relationship growing. If one of us have known him, but we're feeling that relationship is stretched, we don't feel rest, we don't feel connection, then we'd like to help. And we can encourage you, we can pray for you. That's what we are, we're a family. We're glad to do that right now. If you'd like to make that need be known, please come to the front while we stand and sing.
I have found a friend in Jesus, he's everything to me. He's the fairest of 10,000 to my soul. The lily of the valley, in him alone I see all I need to cleanse and make me fully whole. In sorrow he's my comfort, in trouble he's my stay. He tells me every care on him to roll. He's the lily of the valley, the bright and morning star. He's the fairest of 10,000 to my soul. Oh, he all my griefs has taken, and all my sorrows borne. In temptation he's my strong and mighty tower. I have all for him forsaken, I felt my arrows torn from my heart, and now he keeps me by his power. Though all the world forsake me, and Satan tempt me sore, through Jesus I shall safely reach the goal. He's the lily of the valley, the bright and morning star. He's the fairest of 10,000 to my soul. He will never, never leave me, nor yet forsake me here, while I live by faith and do his blessed will. Oh, wall of fire about me, I've nothing now to fear. With his manna he my hungry soul shall fill. Then sweeping up to glory, to see his blessed face, where rivers of delight shall ever roll. He's the